Hi everybody, I'm Danny and welcome to the State of PWAs. This is a talk that I gave last night at the Fronteers Meetup in Amsterdam. I had quite some people asking for a recording on X, but unfortunately due to some technical difficulties we were not able to provide a decent recording for you. So I decided to record it now and put it on YouTube so you can follow this presentation on the State of PWAs. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Danny Moerkerke. I'm a freelance web developer and PWA specialist from the Netherlands. I'm also quite active on X and I also write a lot of articles on Medium, mostly about the modern web platform and all the stuff that's new on it. I'm also the creator of What PWA Can Do Today, which is a showcase of demos of what is possible with PWAs today. There are currently 31 demos in the app, and the nice thing about it is that the app is a PWA itself. So what you can do is you can install it to your device and then see for yourself what is supported on it. So in this presentation I want to tell you about the current state of affairs for progressive web apps, the politics and the new and upcoming features. But first let's zoom out a little bit for maybe the people who are not really aware of this, to answer the question, what is a PWA anyway? Well, it already says it in the name. A PWA is a progressive web app, and that means that a PWA is in fact just a web app, but it has some extra features that give it some very nice superpowers. There are basically only two things that you need to add to a web app to turn it into a PWA. These are the manifest.json file and the service worker. The manifest.json file is just a JSON file that contains some metadata about your web app. For example, the name and the description are in there. You can also define icons in there, so whenever you install the progressive web app to the home screen of your device, there will be an icon, of course, and the icons that are shown, you can define them in here. It also contains information on how your progressive web app will be displayed and presented. For example, the theme color and the background color are in there. And also if your app is displayed in portrait or landscape mode. You can also define shortcuts in there. If you press and hold the icon of the app on an Android device, for example, a context menu will pop up, and that menu will contain these shortcuts that are basically just shortcuts to pages inside your web app. And it also contains some screenshots. I'll talk about that later. These are the screenshots that will be shown when you try to install the web app. The second part of it is mostly the most important part actually of a web app. It's the service worker. A service worker is a special kind of web worker in the sense that it sits between your web app and the network, and it can intercept all network traffic from your web app. So the service worker provides offline support. You can use it to make your web app work fully offline. It also takes care of receiving push notifications and background tasks like background sync and background fetch that I'll also talk about later. So if you add these two things to your app, to your web app, then you can turn it into a PWA, which basically means that any web app can be a PWA. There are already quite some companies who are using PWAs. Myself, I'm a very frequent user of the X PWA. There's the Instagram PWA, Google Maps, Spotify has a very nice PWA. And I'd also like to mention Figma. The Figma team have done an incredible job of porting their app to the web. I don't want to say that all these apps are really like groundbreaking or revolutionary apps, but what they demonstrate very clearly is that a lot of apps, a lot of native apps might as well be progressive web apps, because progressive web apps can do almost all of the things that native apps can do, and that's what these apps clearly demonstrate. There's also now an app store for progressive web apps. You could compare it to the Apple App Store, with the difference that they will never take your money, at least. There is no such thing or like an Apple review process or something inside this store.app. You can put reviews there, but in essence it's just a collection of nice progressive web apps that you can use today. So that's what web apps are, progressive web apps are, but then it also begs the question, why would you build a progressive web app? Well, progressive web apps have a couple of very nice benefits, and the most important one of that is that you can use one code base to deploy your app as a web app, as a mobile app, and a desktop app. The only thing you really need is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, so it's only just web technologies. And if you have that, you can deploy it to web, mobile, and desktop. There are, of course, also other options like Flutter and Expo, for example, which also can do this. But yeah, when it comes to PWAs, this is definitely the simplest way to deploy your app everywhere. You can also freely distribute your progressive web app. You can just put it on the web and send a link to somebody. It can be found on Google. There is no App Store dependency whatsoever, so if you want to distribute your PWA, you don't need to go to an App Store or something. And it also has the benefit that Apple cannot kick you out if they don't like you anymore, or if they want to provide their own version of your app. PWAs are also very lightweight. Native apps can be around tens of megabytes, sometimes even around 100 megabytes. PWAs are typically much lighter than that. Like I said, it's only HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. PWAs are also very secure. By default, they run inside the browser sandbox, which is by default much more restricted when it comes to permissions than for native apps. So they are by nature very secure. PWAs are very easy to share with the URL. If you want somebody to install your progressive web app, just send them the link. They can find it on the web and then they can install it from there. Also a very nice feature, one of the most important ones, is that you get automatic updates for free with progressive web apps. So whenever you have a new version of your PWA, you just deploy it to your web server and you're done. And the next time somebody opens your PWA, they will get the next version automatically. So a lot of new features have come up that I will talk about now, features that are already here, features that are upcoming. So it's safe to say that PWAs are now better than ever. PWAs are now supported on all platforms and devices, so you can install them literally everywhere. iOS, Android, desktop, they can be installed anywhere. There's a lot of new and upcoming features that I'm going to talk about, and iOS support has improved drastically. I mean, the iOS team and the WebKit team have done a tremendous job of getting that support to a much higher level. We'll see later on in the presentation that the lack of features on iOS is still a problem, but nevertheless, iOS support has improved dramatically in the past years. So let's have a look at the features that we have and that we have right now and see what your web app can do today. One of the biggest additions from last year was push notifications finally on iOS. It means that your web app can now receive push notifications even when it's not running. So that means that when your PWA is not open and you get a push notification to your device, the service worker will wake it up and show the push notification. There is still one limitation right now on iOS, is that if you want to use push notifications on iOS, you need to install the web app. So unfortunately, there's no push notifications yet for web apps running in Safari. If you have the web app running in Safari, you won't get push notifications. But then, if you add it to the home screen, you will have them. File system access was also a big one from last year. It means that your web app can now access the file system on your device. You can save files, open files, delete them, create folders, all of that. On mobile, this is not supported, but mobile devices support the Origin Private File System, or OPFS for short. The OPFS is like a virtual file system, and that means that the files and the folders that you have in there, that you create in there, do not necessarily correspond to so-called physical files on the file system. So whereas on desktop you can interact with any file that's on your file system, on a mobile device you can also only do it on the OPFS, on that virtual file system. But from the perspective of the web app, this is just a real file system. You can see folders in there, you can browse folders, you can create folders, you can create files, open files, edit files, delete them, anything that you could normally do with an actual file system. Persistent storage, also a feature that has been long awaited, that is supported now everywhere. It means that your web app can request to save data that will not be wiped out by the browser anymore. This has always been a specific problem, or especially on iOS. On iOS it was the case that when ITP was on, Intelligent Tracking Prevention, that if you didn't interact with your web app for 7 days, that iOS would wipe out all the data, and then you had to start all over again, which always was a big problem. Now that is no longer the case. Your progressive web app can request persistent storage, and it will get persistent storage if it is installed. And that means that the data will never be wiped out anymore unless the user will wipe it out manually. But if you don't do that, you can rest assured that the data that your web app stores will be there until it is removed manually. But the operating system itself will never do that anymore. Biometric authentication, also a big one and one of my personal favorites. It means that you can now let your web app let users log in with their Face ID or fingerprint, or even with a USB key, and that means that you can do away with passwords altogether, which is of course a much more safer way of logging in. You do need to provide a small backend service for that, but if you have that in place, then implementing this on the front end is quite simple actually. The contact picker is now almost supported on all platforms as well. It means that your web app can now access contacts on the user's device, which can of course come in handy when you have a web app that needs to communicate through phone numbers or email addresses or something. On iOS you still will need to enable this manually because it's still behind a feature flag. I have to say that it's been behind a feature flag for quite a while, so I suspect and hope that this will be enabled by default in the near future. There are also a couple of nice browser and OS specific features that have come out recently. Most notably the improved install UI, which is now supported in Chrome and Edge on desktop and in Chrome on Android. It means that when users try to install your web app, for example when they use that icon right there that you can see on the screen at the arrow in the address bar, this is the icon that shows up whenever you can install the web app in Chromium based browsers. When you click that, before you would just get a small dialog that said you can install the web app, but nowadays you can get the improved install UI, which means that it will show, as you can see on the screen, it will show the name of the app, the description, and a couple of screenshots that you can define in the manifest.json file, as I mentioned before. So that will show up now when you try to install it on desktop. Let's zoom in a little bit. What you see on the left is what you get on desktop. And whenever you try to install a PWA on Android, you will see what you now see on the left. So when you click the install button, a bottom sheet will pop up. Similar to what you see on desktop, and that will also contain the name of the app, the description, and then the screenshots that you can define for your web app. So this is a very nice addition that brings the installation experience of installing a progressive web app much closer to the experience that you get when you install a native app. Of course, users are still familiar with installing native apps and they're not so familiar with installing web apps. So by providing this experience that's much closer to the native experience, this will hopefully contribute to a more wide-scale adoption of progressive web apps. There are also some features that have come to macOS. Most notably, you can now add web apps to the dock on macOS. You can do this actually for any web app. It doesn't necessarily have to be a progressive web app, but if you have a PWA that you add to the doc, then macOS will also take the information from the manifest.json file and use that in the icon and the name, for example. What also has finally come to macOS are the shortcuts. So whenever you right-click the icon of a PWA on macOS, it will also show the shortcuts that you get on Android. There's one limitation though for this, which is a bit unfortunate. Your web app needs to be open already in order to access these shortcuts. So for example, on Android you can press and hold the icon even before the app is running, and then you can access the shortcuts. But unfortunately on macOS that is not the case. So if the PWA is not running and you right click the icon, the shortcuts will not be there. But if you open the PWA and then click the icon, then the shortcuts will be there. Of course it's a very nice addition, but I think it misses the goal somewhat, because it would be better if you could access these shortcuts already even before the PWA is running. But of course it's a nice feature nevertheless. So these are the features that you can use right now. There are also some new features that your web app can, well, use almost today. Maybe you will need to polyfill something here, or we'll need to wait for some stuff to be enabled by default. But these things are almost here. Most notably the view transitions. View transitions enable web apps to have native app-like page transitions. And you can define these transitions with some simple CSS animations or transitions. You can do it for both single page apps and even multi-page apps. At least now on Chrome and Edge they support also transitions for multi-page apps. Support will also come to Safari 18, but then only for single page apps. For multi-page apps this is really nice, because it also enables you to add these page transitions even when you have a web app that is completely static, that only consists of static HTML pages. You can now also define these transitions between these pages. So let me show you a little bit of what I mean with these view transitions. I'm going to show you the view transition demo from what PWA can do today, where you can select a couple of different transitions. And the first one that I want to show you is one that you're probably very familiar with. It's one that you see in native apps a lot, the sliding transition, with the page sliding in from the left and out to the right. This is a flip transition where the page flips over, also very nice. We can do some scaling. And then my personal favorite, the enlarging icons. And what that does is whenever you click an icon, it will just transition into the underlying demo page, which gives a very nice effect. What's nice about these transitions, or especially the last one, is that you really only need a few lines of CSS to do this. Especially the last one, where you let one DOM element transition into another, is something that you almost get for free by the browser in view transitions. So that is definitely a very nice thing to have. Although Chrome now supports the multi-page app view transitions, there is still a bug with this in the latest Chrome version, which is Chrome 126 right now. I'll show you a screen recording to show you what I mean. This is a demo of the multi-page app view transitions. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll see what I mean. Whenever you click a link, you will slowly see some kind of browser UI that shows you the link that you are going to. So, which is of course not what we want, because it breaks the fluidity of the view transition. There is already a bug report filed for this, so hopefully this will be fixed very soon. Another very nice feature is the background fetch. Oh, let me pause that for a second and then play it for you later. What background fetch does, it enables your web app to download files in the background even when it's not running. So a very nice use case for this would be something like a podcast app, where you can, of course, download podcast episodes. These episodes can be quite large, so it may take quite a while for them to download fully. So imagine that you have a web app and you want to download a podcast, but you don't want to wait for it, so you close the web app. Then the download will be completely gone. What background fetch does, it enables your web app to download these files even in the background. So what it does is when you download a file and then you close the web app, background fetch will take care of continuing that download in the background, and then whenever the background download finishes and you open the web app again, your download will be there for you. This is currently not supported yet on iOS, but it has already been in Safari Tech Preview for a while in the feature flags. So I expect this to be added to this soon. It is in the feature flags right now in Safari Tech Preview, but it's not functional yet. So it's basically just a placeholder, but it does mean that it will come to Safari in the near future. So let's look at a screen recording for this. This is a recording from an Android device. Let me start it there. Yeah, this is a demo from what PWA can do today. We go to the background fetch demo, and there you will see a playlist of some MP3 files that will start to download. We'll start all three. You see the first one is downloading already. You can see the progress there. Then if we close the app and we go to the notification center on Android, you will see that the download is continuing there. Then if we go to flight mode, the download stops. And then when we enable the network again, you will see after a few seconds that the download will continue. There we go. And then whenever the download is finished, it will just simply go to the next download in the background. Then if we open the app again and we navigate back to the demo, you will see, we'll go to the playlist again, and then after a few seconds you will see that the progress will pick up. 46% now. There we go. So the download just continues if it hasn't been finished yet, and then you start the app again, the download will just continue there. Another nice new feature is the background sync. What it does is it enables your web app to defer actions while offline and then execute them when the app comes back online. A use case for this would be, for example, if your web app needs to send out API post requests to update data on a server, for example. If you send that request while the app is offline with the data, then the data might be lost because the request will fail. With background sync, what you can do is you can schedule it, and then when it's offline, for example, you can save the request to indexed.db, and then when the app comes back online, it will detect that, and a sync event will be raised, and then it can send the request after all. What you could also implement with something like this is, for example, a outbox functionality of an email app. So whenever the email app is offline, the email that is sent will be saved to a database or something, IndexedDB for example, and then whenever the app comes back online, the event will be raised and then the message will be sent. This is currently not supported on iOS yet, but you can sort of polyfill it with online and offline events. Whenever a web app goes online or offline, an event will be raised, and you can also use that to detect it and do something similar with this to schedule these events. It will not give you the fine-grained control that background sync provides you, but if you need something on iOS like this, you could polyfill it with these events. So these are a couple of very nice features that are now available and that are coming available, and that means that your web app can already be a great PWA. There's quite an impressive list of stuff that we can use already. Your web app can work offline, you can send push notifications like I mentioned, the native file system can be used, biometric authentication. In addition to that, for example, you can also access the user's camera, microphone, the contacts and the location. So the list of stuff that you can do right now on most or all platforms is pretty impressive. But of course, it's not all roses. There is still that big elephant in the room with that logo on it from a certain company. Although iOS support has improved drastically in the past 2 years, there is still a lot of stuff missing on iOS. Most notably the install prompt or the install UI. This is something that we don't have yet on iOS. Right now, if you want to install a web app on iOS, what you need to do is you need to go to the share menu, and then you need to go down to add to home screen icon and then install the PWA from there. It's not impossible, it's not very complicated. We can of course educate users to do this, but it's still a major hindrance in the wide-scale adoption of progressive web apps. The case is still that people are much more familiar with installing native apps, which is just simply going to the App Store and install it from there. Even though this is maybe just a minor thing, if we need to educate iOS users on that, if the experience is different on different platforms, that is still a problem. So as long as we don't get this, this will still be a major obstacle towards wide-scale adoption on iOS or for PWAs in general. Although we did get push notifications last year on iOS, the implementation of it is still quite limited. On Android, for example, you can define some buttons that are shown inside the push notification and that you can assign different actions to. On iOS, this is simply not possible. The only thing you get is you can receive the push notification, and when the user clicks it, you can open the PWA, but that's about it what you can do. There's also no Bluetooth support yet, no NFC support, no USB on iOS. Although we did get shortcuts for PWAs on macOS, there are no shortcuts on iOS. Your PWA can also not be a shared target, unfortunately, on iOS. So whereas your PWA can share data to other apps on iOS, you cannot share data from other apps to your PWA, which is quite unfortunate. Right now the orientation also cannot be locked, so if it makes sense for your web app to only be viewed in landscape or portrait, you can lock that on Android. The same thing is unfortunately not possible on iOS. Also the wake lock API still doesn't work for installed PWAs. What the wake lock API does, it prevents your screen from being locked. Use case for this, of course, would be something like a cooking recipe app. Imagine that you are cooking, you are reading a recipe from your phone. Your hands are dirty. At that time, of course, you don't want your screen to go to sleep. You want it to stay on. Well, for a web app right now in Safari, you can do this. You can activate the wake lock API and then your screen will never go to sleep. But as soon as you install that web app as a PWA, that functionality is unfortunately gone. There is also no way to detect from a web app running inside Safari if that same web app is also installed as a PWA on that same device. This is something that hinders me personally, for example, for the What PWA Can Do Today app. If you open that in Safari on iOS, you will see a button to install it. But then after the web app has been installed as a PWA on iOS, I would like to hide that button because it doesn't make sense anymore. The PWA was already installed and you don't want people to install it twice. So then I would like to hide that button, but in order to do that, the web app in Safari would need to detect if that same web app has already been installed. This is something that you can do on Android, but on iOS, unfortunately, this is not possible. In addition, there are also a couple of long-standing bugs on iOS. Very notably the on-screen keyboard. If the on-screen keyboard comes up in a web app on iOS, it will push up all the content out of the screen, even stuff that is fixed with display fixed, for example. So if you have something like a chat app, typically you have the name of the person you are chatting with in the top bar of the screen. If you open that on-screen keyboard on Android and that top bar with the name of the recipient is fixed, it will stay there. On iOS, unfortunately, it will just push everything off the screen, unfortunately. It does not respect display fixed and everything will be gone. Also, dark mode switching does not work on iOS while a PWA is running. It did work before, but it was broken and it was never fixed. So although dark mode does work for PWAs, you cannot switch while the PWA is running. So if you have a PWA open and you want to go to dark mode, what you need to do is you need to close the PWA, then switch to dark mode, and then open the PWA again, and then you will have dark mode on. But switching while it is open, unfortunately, is not possible. Also, picture-in-picture does not work for video streams on iOS, so it does work for regular video files playing. But if you have a video stream from your camera, for example, you cannot use picture-in-picture on that. The last point is something that really bugs me as a PWA developer. There is the remote debugging of a PWA on an iOS device is it's crap. It's hell. What you can do is you can connect an iPhone to a MacBook, and then on the MacBook you can install the PWA running on the iPhone. But there will be no console logs coming from the server worker. So if your server worker is logging some stuff, you cannot see it. Even worse, if the web app is installed as a PWA, you cannot even inspect the service worker. So if you have a web app running in Safari and then you connect the iPhone to the Mac and try to inspect it, you will see the service worker. But whenever that service worker or that web app is installed as a PWA, you cannot install the service worker anymore. So these are still the bugs, the things that are hindering us in iOS, and this is a major obstacle. On the other hand, we have a lot of new features coming. There's a lot of stuff going on. So will 2025 be the year of PWAs? On the bright side, the more and more features that we got, there are better features than ever. On the other side, the lack of iOS support remains. There's still a lot of stuff not working on iOS for PWAs. Fortunately, the Digital Market Act, the DMA, is now in effect, which is a set of laws, of legislation. And among other things, this DMA dictates that users should be able to install apps from anywhere on an iOS device, even from outside the App Store. There are two ways of doing this. You can do this through sideloading. Sideloading means that you can install a native app on iOS from a website or any other location, just like you can do on macOS right now, or that you can install it from an alternative app store on iOS. An alternative app store is just like an app store that any developer can implement right now on iOS. This has never been possible before, but Apple is now forced by the rules that are inside the DMA to provide this. What this will bring for us for PWAs is real non-kit web browsers on iOS. So currently the situation is that if you install a third-party browser on iOS, for example, if you install Chrome or Edge or Firefox on iOS, what you get is not a real Chrome, for example, because all third-party browsers on iOS are obliged by Apple to use the WebKit engine. The WebKit engine is the engine that powers the Safari browser. So this means that any other browser that you install on iOS is basically just a Safari browser in disguise with another skin around it. So if you have Chrome on iOS, it's basically technically just a Safari browser in Chrome clothing, in Chrome design, as it were. And the problem with that is that if these browsers cannot use their own engines, but they are obliged to use the WebKit engine. Right now, the WebKit engine is very limited in its features for PWA. So that means that all browsers that you install on iOS are very limited in this, and this is Apple's way of gatekeeping that PWAs cannot really be supported on iOS like they are on desktop and Android, for example. If we get proper sideloading and alternative app stores, again, the DMA dictates that this should be possible on iOS, then we may finally get some real non-kit web browsers on iOS, and then we could also have finally full functioning PWAs on iOS. Although Apple is working towards this, they are very reluctant to implement these things. The DMA took effect in March this year. That was the deadline. Right before that, Apple responded by disabling progressive web apps completely on iOS 17.4. And the reasoning for this was that the DMA stipulates that any web browser, so also any real non-WebKit browsers that is installed on iOS, should be able to install a PWA. Well, currently it is only possible to install a PWA on iOS with Safari or any WebKit browser. So installing PWAs is only possible with WebKit browsers on iOS. So that means any non-WebKit browser would not be able to install a PWA. And since the DMA dictates that all browsers should be treated fairly equally on iOS, Apple said, forget it, we cannot do this, we cannot implement this installation for other non-WebKit browsers. We'll just have to disable PWAs altogether, so then at least we won't get a fine. We treat them all equally, meaning no PWAs at all. So at that time, if you would open a PWA on iOS 17.4, it would just open as a simple web app. Well, of course, there was a lot of protest against this, so luckily they reversed that decision in iOS 17.5. So right now, PWAs are back on iOS, but unfortunately we're still left with the status quo. We still don't have any fully functioning PWAs. It should be possible in the near future for example, for Chrome to provide a real Chrome browser on iOS, but it's still very difficult. Right now there is only one alternative app store from Epic Games. After a lot of trouble, they were allegedly able to launch an app store. I've also read and followed quite some research on how to implement an alternative app store on iOS, and I can say that from the research, it seems that this is unworkable. There are still a lot of bugs and missing features, unclear stuff on iOS. So Apple really makes it as difficult as possible for other developers to provide alternative app stores. On top of that, they need to sign developer agreements that are very unclear and very restricting. So a lot of developers are quite reluctant now to even try to implement an alternative app store. So in summary, you could say that Apple continues to frustrate these developments. I think that in the end they will comply with the Digital Market Acts. They have already been fined by the EU for a staggering 1.8 million euros, which may not be that much money for Apple, but it will surely hurt. And of course, if they will keep up with this stuff, then they will be fined. There will even be bigger fines, of course, for Apple. Like I said, I do suspect that they will in the future comply and embrace PWAs, but this may just really take a long time. Apple is really in for a long battle, so it just remains to be seen when we will ever get fully functional PWAs on iOS. If you are interested in these developments, I would definitely recommend you to follow Misk on X. Misk is the account of two iOS developers that do a lot of research in these fields. They post a lot of screen recordings, videos of what they are doing on iOS, what they are researching. So if you are interested in that, definitely you should follow them. Also definitely follow the Open Web Advocacy. This is a group of software engineers that I'm also a little bit involved with. And what they do is they provide regulators, policymakers, legislators with all the technical data and knowledge that they need to make this legislation and to also battle these anti-competitive stuff that big companies like Apple and Google are doing to basically get a monopoly on their systems. Of course, this is all very difficult technical stuff. So what the Open Web Advocacy does is research this, write reports about this, and help policymakers in making legislation like the Digital Market Acts, for example. So definitely follow them as well. I also try to write about this and report about this. Like I said, you can follow me on X. I also publish a weekly newsletter. Well, I try to publish it every week. Sometimes it doesn't work, every 2 weeks, but I'm definitely working towards publishing this every week. It's called Modern Web Weekly. It's all about progressive web apps, web components, and new features of the web in general. And you can subscribe to that. Of course, I also report about this political stuff, so you can also use this to stay informed about all this stuff on PWAs. That's it for me. Thank you for joining.